Hello, everyone, and welcome to Global Gurus, where every Friday we explore stories of international business and speak with industry leaders operating around the world. I'm your host, Philip Auerbach of Auerbach International. Thank you again so much for joining us. As most of you know, we start each podcast with a running segment called Faux Pas Fridays, where we explore a funny blooper or a mistranslation that does not quite convey the professional image that your organization wants to project. Today's blooper is actually a sign in a public park in China near some benches, and the sign is both in Chinese and in English. And in English, it says very simply, when you're getting off with your lover, pay attention to your bag. So with that wonderful thought, I'd like to introduce today's guest, who is Dan Vega. And Dan is an entrepreneur, a speaker, a business coach, a talk show host, and an investor. He's got an amazing background with many years' experience, many companies, and a lot of global and domestic experience. Welcome, Dan. Delighted you're joining us.
Thank you, Philip. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So perhaps you could start, as I start with many of our guests, by asking about your background of how you grew up and how you gained your global experience.
You know, I grew up in the Los Angeles, LA area. Both my parents loved me, but they were in survival mode, not thrive, but they were surviving. My mother's she was a teacher's aide. My father was a salesman of many different things. And we had our problems as a family. He had a lot of hang-ups and some addiction problems, and so it was a rocky road. And I just grew up in that environment, like so many people do, of which bills do we pay, which ones do we push, right? And robbing Peter to pay Paul, and just kind of making it. And I got to a point where I was making it, and I kind of was under the impression that I was doing well, because all of my peers were like, wow, you're paying all your bills. That's fantastic. That was my first objective, I guess. And I thought, well, this is kind of existing, but it's not living. And as you know, I have a background in mathematics. And so because of that, I got the interest of some really successful people in the Silicon Valley area that, fortunately for my sake, they wanted to mentor me and they took interest in me. And that really worked out well because I didn't have that father figure. And really from there, I had steady growth. I think the fifth or sixth mentor that I had, I was probably now about 19 or 20 years old, was one of the Forbes 400. He was number 25 on the Forbes list. And
wow,
this guy just was, the business he was doing, the success he had, not just in financially, but with his family and his friends and faith. It was just it was something I wanted to emulate. And that kind of put me on the road originally towards success.
That's great. And was he involved in international business?
Yes, he had a net worth of $4 or $5 billion. He was doing business all over the world. In fact, I remember one time they did a big write-up on him in Success magazine, and he has this hand over his face. It's a really famous issue, and it says, "The billionaire nobody knows." And inside the article, it talked about how he would make over 400 million a year just interest only before he raised a finger.
Wow.
Before he even went to work. And a lot of our friends kind of poo-pooed on that. I said, I can't believe he makes that much money, but I admired him for it, because here's a guy that obviously is never going to spend the money he has,
right?
Yet he kept working. And the reason he kept working is he wasn't working for money. He was working for impact. He wanted to help others. And certainly that's what he did. And come to find out, majority of that recurring revenue was international business.
Oh,
yeah.
Fascinating. So did he ever take you on trips with him?
Yeah, so it started off as a mentor-mentee kind of relationship. I'm a young guy. I had no business experience really. And he looked after me in a very fatherly way. And then eventually, I was like, I got to listen twice as much as I talk. And for me, that's a lot of listening. So I really tried to just absorb. And for a couple of years, that was kind of the relationship. And then we started, joint venturing. I would travel with them. We started joint venturing on different projects and partnering on things. And then eventually, towards the end of our relationship, he passed away a few years back. He would say, "Hey, let me run this past you. What do you think of that?"
Wow.
And so I could actually really contribute uh, as well. So
Are you able to mention his name, or is it
yeah,
confidential?
sure. It was Bill Bartman and
Bill,
Bill
I'm sorry,
Bartman.
Bartman.
Bartman. Yes,
Bartman?
yes, out of Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh,
And he really was a believer. I mean, this person had more success than, most people on the planet, but he was a big believer in having some anonymity.
hmm.
He liked kind of having the luxury of being able to do what he wanted to do and make a large impact. But
Uh-huh.
at the same time, one thing he told me was, because I used to talk to him, especially in the last few years, about social media. We had that discussion a lot. I'm not real active on social media, and there's a purpose kind of for me behind that. But I remember having discussions with him about social when it first kind of really Facebook and the others really started getting traction about, hey man, don't you want your presence on social? Which looking back now is a really ignorant question, I think, for him, for me to ask. But he said, when we think of influence these days, we think about social influence, being on these social platforms. And he asked me a question one day. He said, what is a really high measure of influence? Being connected on the front lines to maybe tens of thousands of people or even a million people, where they have you, you're on a social influence, or having the ear of 100 powerful men.
Right.
And he's like, I don't have to be out there, but some of the biggest players in the world, I advise them and I have their ear.
Right.
And that's a lot of influence. And I always remember that. So with my own plan, I've tried to kind of follow that as well. I think that I'm connected to a lot of the right people and I advise a lot of the right people, but social influence just doesn't, it's not a part of my plan.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So I know that you've done business in other countries, primarily, I believe, throughout Europe, as well as Asia and Africa and India, and some in South and Central America as well, I think.
Mhm.
Um, can you tell me some stories of some of your experiences in terms of what worked, what didn't work, and just from different countries?
Yeah, actually, I think that first of all, you have to be doing um, international business. I mean, back, a couple decades ago, if you were doing, let's say you live in the U.S. and you're doing business across the U.S., you were considered a pretty big company or a pretty big player. But
Right.
with today's, world of social media and you have mechanisms like Zoom and other things, it's crazy not to be expanding our company to nationally or if not globally. I
Mhm.
mean, it's just we're not taking advantage of things. I do business. I'm on conversations every day from people from, as you mentioned, Europe, Australia, Asia, all over the place, and we're just sitting here doing business face to face. And it's a huge missed opportunity if we're not expanding our business globally into other countries. I mean, that goes for them in other countries that might watch this. We got to expand in the U.S. markets if we're not already, right? Now, to your question, there's different challenges, of course, different pivots, and along with those things, sometimes the difference in culture that we have to really kind of think about and prepare for. Um, in 2006, I started a university called Blue University. It's BLU University, and we try to create a very high-end curriculum for entrepreneurs and business leaders. So I'm not knocking traditional education. There's plenty of people that are doing that already. But if you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a architect, engineer, some specified science, traditional might be the path. But for the person that wants to be an entrepreneur, they want to launch an app, build a product, go into the entertainment or arts, whatever those things are, that education is not going to work well. You need a different type of education. So we wanted to create a school that was very successful, people that have actually made it in the real world. These are people that have taught business and actually have done business globally, and they're teaching what they've learned. It's not somebody teaching hypothetically in a classroom. And as we expanded, of course, we ran into challenges as we scaled throughout the US. But then we thought, wow, if we're really about impact, we have to get to other countries. So our first venture was opening a brick and mortar in Nairobi, Kenya,
Mm.
and that had some challenges, right? Um, there's a lot of, and first of all, the people that I've met throughout Africa, and I've done a lot of business in Africa, the majority of them are amazing people. But there's always a few, people that give everybody a bad name. There's some scams you got to watch for. There's certain different things that you have to be on guard with, and that goes for any country, I think. But we still have that school today, and we're really still very glad that we've done it. We've been able to impact a lot of people's lives in Africa. I think what the underlying problem is, Philip, is I think there's a lot of people look at ethics and values as just a black and white thing, like this is ethical, this isn't.
Right.
And I will say, and as you know, that I am the head of a company that's based around ethics. Um, there is different levels. So sometimes there's things that, let's say in the United States, that it's not illegal, but it doesn't make it ethical, right? So in the United States, the bar has been set so low when it comes to ethics. It's like, okay, this company's not, they're not breaking the law, and so they've done business for 20 years without breaking the law. We deem them as a very high ethical company. That's not necessarily true. Just not breaking the law doesn't mean you're a very ethical company. And sometimes we'll find ourselves in situations where we have to make a decision and we can go this way or this way. Both ways are ethical, but one might have a higher moral standard. Might like, well, this is more ethical. This could actually impact more people. This can help empower more, generate more money to be shared, whatever. And so I think that there is a range of ethics. And I think that differs from country to country. You get into some third world countries that are having a hard time keeping food on the table and sustaining shelter and some basics.
Right.
Their range of ethics might be a little lower. They're not breaking the law per se in their country, but what's acceptable behavior with them might not be acceptable behavior to you.
Right.
Doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it, there's a difference there that we have to make sure that we discuss and create some fixed parameters before we decide to do business. And I've seen that really in most cultures that I do business in, is let's have some discussions. Let's really think about parameters of what we deem, what the terms are and what we think ethical behavior is. And sometimes going into a business deal with certain countries, I'll just say, let's put down a list of what we think is ethical behavior. And if things go south with our company, what should be some of the maybe ramifications? How would we fix it? Before I even do business, like if we got into this deal and it went south, how would we think about correcting? And you would be surprised we'll just send a group of people over there to take care of them. I'm like, okay, well, from where I'm from, not great. That's probably not the best way to go about things, right? But it's acceptable in other places. So we do have to have a lot of those conversations. But I will say that although doing business internationally does present some challenges, it's absolutely necessary if we're going to allocate the right resources. Because, I know we've talked before, Philip, that the number one focus of a true entrepreneur and a good person is about impact, right? We have to be others focused. We have to provide real value to others, and without stepping on the heads and shoulders of people, and really thinking about upholding a high standard when it comes to morals and ethics. However, right behind that, I will say that we have to have the proper view of money, and not just the proper view of money, but we have to get really good and effective at monetization. Because the fact of the matter is, if our vision is to impact tens of thousands or millions of people,
Mhm.
that takes millions of dollars, right? Like I love your charity, as a matter of fact, I had no idea so many nonprofits kind of fell by the wayside in just a few short years because of the lack of resources. So setting up a nonprofit to help facilitate and strengthen these other nonprofits is absolutely amazing to me. And as
Yeah.
if you want to impact tens of millions or tens of thousands of people or potentially millions, it's expensive. You have to have a lot of money to do that. So I hate when people on social platforms or Instagram or whatever, they'll be saying one thing out of one side of the mouth of, it's not about the money, it's just about helping people. We don't care about the money. We just want to help more people, more people, more people, which I get. It should be about people first. But they're virtually putting no attention on the dollars and cents side of things. And if we don't get really good at the monetization side, we're never going to allocate the appropriate resources it's going to take to accomplish the first objective, right? So
Right.
that's why I feel like, generational wealth was never my number one intention. It was high on the list, but it wasn't number one. But it is necessary if you want to, be able to accomplish that first objective and help.
One of the major issues with developing countries, especially, is what we would very simply call bribery. Um, and as you've mentioned, and as you know, what is ethical in one country or what's acceptable in one culture is not acceptable in another, as you were just saying. Um, but bribery seems to be the primary issue that Western companies, Americans and others, deal with when they deal with developing countries. And bribery, of course, has many forms, whether it's bakshish, like a little tip, or whether it's millions of dollars in a consulting fee to get a contract from a government minister. So how have you dealt with those kinds of issues?
I've certainly run into it many times.
Well, the mute seems to be on. Or can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now it's better.
Okay.
Yes.
I've certainly dealt with it many times. And again, it's kind of like what we were talking about. There's a range of, here, if people asking you for money, it's a bribe. But over there, even the most ethical companies and most ethical people, they're like, this is just the way it is here. It's not a bribe. It's just part of the culture and it's part of the way to do business, right? So
Right.
I'm like, well, okay. So as you mentioned, sometimes it's a coaching fee or it's some other type thing that you have to build in to the business, because that's just the standard, MO down there in many countries. And I've dealt with that throughout India and Africa, especially, and even South America as well. But what I try to do is just try to have my parameters of what I'm comfortable with. Like if somebody in the U.S. is like, we'll let you put your product in these stores, but we need a kickback. And there's a legal compliance issue where we can't do that. That's a no-go. But
Mm.
if you're in a country that's like, oh yeah, this is perfectly acceptable behavior, and this guy needs $100 per unit as a advisory fee, and that's just how it goes. And I'm like, is that against any compliance? No. I'm like, okay, we got to get the deal across the line. You know
Right.
what I mean? So you have to have kind of what you're comfortable with. But I've dealt with it many times, and there's been a few cases where we just could not see eye to eye. It was just you have bribery, and then you have the next level, which is real crime.
Right.
And it's like, look, I can't participate in this. And then you are happy to leave with your life on some of those deals. I'll give you, for instance, Philip.
Yes.
So we were actually one of my guys that was working with me, we were investing really heavily in commodities. And he's like, look, man, there's a gold mine in Kenya, and this guy's got a lot of gold for this price, and he wants to move it in the U.S. And there was a great margin. And I told him, I said, look, I've done this before in different African countries, and you're dealing direct with the mines, which is great, but there's a lot of issues there, and we're going to have a lot of documents and things signed, and there's a lot of vetting. Trust me, I know these people, blah blah blah. So I send my guy down to Kenya, and he sends me back pictures of him and the guy with just bucket, like these are probably like these big containers, probably 50-gallon buckets full of gold nuggets. There's probably 20 of them. And he
Yeah.
shoots a video where he's dipping his hand in my guy, and it's just
Wow.
gold everywhere. And they verified the purity of the gold. It was the real deal. And it was all this gold was in a warehouse. Picture like a 40 or 50,000 square warehouse. They had pallets upon pallets of USD, just cash, and Europe, like just pallets of cash, like hundreds of millions. And I was like, I gotta be honest, that scares the bejesus out of me. Like
Yeah.
somebody that has that much cash and gold, something seems not good. No, 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 trust, it's all good. We verified everything. Well, the scam they were running, it wasn't that the gold wasn't real, and it wasn't that the purity of what they were promising wasn't real, and it wasn't that they were going to try to screw us on the price that was agreed upon, which is normally where you're going to run into all the hiccups. The problem was we sign all the documents, you load the gold onto a plane to go home, right? Everything's kosher or seems kosher. Then they tip off the cops, and the cops come and pull up on the airstrip.
The cops in Kenya or the cops in America?
Cops in Kenya.
Kenya.
Before you take off. So they let you get all the way loaded on the plane, no hiccups. Everything's legit. They tip off the cops in Kenya. They stop you on the runway and they say, hey, what are you doing? Well, I got these documents. I'm buying gold from this guy. It's all legit. Here's all the paperwork. We have everything. And they say, look, since this deal has happened, there's another compliance thing that you have to meet. And you can't take this gold out of the country. And you're like, no, I already wired the money. Talk to Bob. He's over here and we did the deal. And we don't care what Bob says. We don't care what Dad says. You have two choices. Either leave and try to leave with the gold, and you'll be in a Nairobi, Kenya prison, or drop the gold off and get out of here.
Wow.
Which one do you want to do? And you've already done everything. You've already paid.
Yeah.
And then you just have to fly away with losing the cash. And then they just sell it to the next guy. And they keep doing it over and over and over and over. So I've had a few hiccups where it stung me and got me good. What I've learned to do is do a little bit of business to see if it goes through and build a relationship and then start getting into deeper water. But I've certainly had my share of some payoffs for sure.
Wow, that's a very sophisticated scam right there.
Very much.
Pretty amazing. Wow. And may I ask how much this payment was? Was it
$500,000?
$500,000. Oh God. Wow.
Yeah. But it's like, if there was four of us, like, is all of our lives worth $500,000? Or because I don't want to be stuck in an African prison. Right. So we're like, guys, are we good with eating this? Let's just get the hell out of here.
Oh, wow. So someone there was getting very rich off of that.
Very rich.
Amazing. Yeah. Two questions. One is, can you report these people to Interpol, even though Interpol is European? And second, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which governs how Americans do business abroad. How do you manage that?
We hired some attorneys and we got down the road on this for about a year. And after a year's attorney fees, and basically our own attorneys saying, look, you can't do much. I mean, you could keep this thing alive, but you'll just pay attorney fees for a decade and probably nothing will happen.
Right.
We decided to just, at some point, you got to cut your losses and maybe change your vetting process, or be on the lookout for create a new procedure or process, which is what we did. But in that case, we didn't do much. And now I will say that to that one, I have done successful business in Africa and, like I said, throughout Europe and Asia without any of those problems. So I don't want that one negative story. We've had a few negative stories. That was the biggest one. But I don't want those few negative stories to kind of give people trepidation about expanding globally, because, there's such a big upside, as to doing business internationally. Stuff that America is it's got a lot of competition and a very high standard on certain things.
Right.
So when you expand into other markets like South American markets or European markets, frankly, you don't have all the competitions. I deal a little bit with media, and you could have a C-class celebrity here, let's say a singer that's never really going to be able to break through in the music industry, and send them over to Germany, and the guy's filling 20,000 person stadiums every night, right? Same thing with public speaking, you know. A lot of people have a hard time breaking into the seminar business in the US. So what we'll do is we'll go to other countries, or we'll go to Dubai or, you know, Germany or other places, and it's a lot easier to get bigger paydays to build capital
Hmm.
and get a bigger name. You know, Tony Robbins even had that where he was having a really difficult time breaking into, you know, his own backyard, California. What he did was he went to the Ukraine. Eventually, that led to Russia. He was
Wow.
people like Gorbachev, people heavyweights from those countries were showing up,
Huh.
and then he came back to the U.S. as an international kind of star, and everybody then accepted him. So sometimes it's easier to do business. I found, especially in you know, I won't say especially, but in a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, the culture is just so family-oriented there.
Right.
It's such a great network to expand your business into. It's phenomenal.
Are there certain businesses that you've been involved with that thrive heavily in Latin America because of the family orientation?
Yeah, so with education, um, we've done really well in Spanish-speaking countries because you know they're just trying to learn, and they don't have access to what maybe we have access to in here in the States. And other the other decision of like, can I afford to put myself in, you know, $80,000 of the debt for my education is another big question, right?
Right.
That would take them the rest of their life to pretty much pay off. So we've done really well in those areas. Also, we do a lot in, as you know, I founded a book publishing company years ago. Europe was a really great market for us,
Huh.
uh, and even Asia for books, because we had strong ties to distribution.
Hmm.
We could help put the book out, um, you know, very concentrated throughout the U.S. and Canada, and then we would develop foreign partners to sell foreign rights to other publishers throughout Asia and other countries that
Mm.
you know really helped boost our sales and really kind of made us from a local or regional company to a global company. A lot of that was based on foreign contracts and foreign relationships.
That's fascinating. When you were talking about Latin American education, do you mean BLU University or
Yeah,
something else? Yes.
yeah. For us, it's been through the mechanism of Blue University, but I have a lot of friends as well that are really in the education space that are also thriving in those, you
Mm.
know, throughout South America and Mexico and other places. But yeah, and our own experience has been through Blue University.
What about, I guess, business practices as you've looked at, the ethics are one thing, and that's a fascinating model, basically, to
Yeah.
write out what your expectations are going to be before you start, even. But in terms of other practices such as I don't know, operations or management or marketing or pricing, something like that. How does that affect what you've been doing?
So those aspects are mostly pros, right? Because
Mhm.
honestly, what we found is a lot of different uh, throughout Asia, you know, the business professionals, many of them speak English. Most of Europe, it's kind of mandatory to speak English. So we have a lot that, and on occasion we use translators, but when it comes to, you know, being able to implement overseas, we find really great help at a very a reasonable rate. One
Mhm.
crisis that we're kind of dealing with here in America, as you know, is there's a lot more opportunities right now than people. So especially I think about the service industry that's been just hammered. Where you know I was down by my house about a month ago. Burger King was offering $18 to $20 an hour for a cruise shift leader for Burger King. because they just can't staff good people, because it's not that people don't want to work, but we have this many jobs and opportunities, particularly online, and this many people, right?
Right.
And so that's not the case in most countries, right?
Right.
So it's easy to have retention. We don't have all the drop off. We have it's finding great people to develop is very easy. Finding them at a reasonable rate is very easy. So we've, when it comes to operations, we've really thrived. I think that's some of the largest advantages of doing business outside of the US.
Fascinating. That's great. What about some of the cultural issues that you've encountered in your many travels?
Yeah, so there's pros and cons. First of all, I love going internationally because I get to experience new cultures, right? I love going where the locals go and finding the little eateries. I'm kind of a foodie. So that's an amazing, absolutely amazing experiences. I've had my faux pas, to be honest with you, Philip, over the years, especially when it comes to body language or using physical gestures. So as you know that we can use physical gesturing or emphatic gestures where we use our voice to emphasize certain things.
Mm.
And if you're in Asia, emphasizing just in the wrong place can have a completely different meaning, in
Right.
many countries. And if you're in other countries, just using the wrong gesture, something in America that's very common would be this, which for 75% of the world does
Sticking
not
your
go
thumb
over
up.
very well.
Right. Sticking your thumb up, and yes, like
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
very offensive in many countries. So what I've learned from experience is, like I said, I've had some faux pas, but to really investigate the local culture and how things work, especially in Europe and Asia, and get to know that before we go over. What I do like is we do a lot of classes like on nonverbal communication and body language,
Uh-huh.
because that is a universal language. And I've had some situations where we were really stuck in negotiations and I've had to rely on that. In fact, I'll tell you, several years ago, we owned a lot of sales type companies that had we were like owned franchises for medical equipment, different types of medical equipment for like respiratory problems, whatever. And we were really good. We built many of these offices. And my little brother started young, and there was a German-based manufacturer that was selling this one of these kind of class 2 medical devices in the US. And it was 50 states, about 40 countries. And the president for the United States, Puerto Rico, and Canada, he lived in right outside of Akron, Ohio. And the guy's name was Bill Holden, after the actor. And he actually had a heart attack, and he wanted to have somebody take over. The founders of the company in Germany wanted a new U.S. president, right? Somebody to kind of lead things in the U.S. And so what he wanted me to kind of take over as his successor as president. And I didn't have the time to do it. But what I really wanted was my little brother
Mm.
to be the president. He was about 26 at the time, but he knew the business as well as I did. And I wanted him to have that opportunity. So me and him, through the direction of corporate in Germany, we fly to Ohio. We meet the former or the current president and get his kind of blessing. And then this guy from Germany is supposed to fly in to meet us for the final yes or no. And so I'll never forget this as long as I live is, so I hired a local translator from one of the local universities to help, and I was naive at the time. So I'm like, guy speaks German and English, you'll do. Good enough. And so we go into this room, and what we were asking for was a $5 million sign-on bonus. And we wanted this, the United States, all of the US, Puerto Rico, Canada, wanted my little brother to do it. We had a whole bunch of terms. So this guy flies over from Germany. His name was Helmut, like a dog from hell, literally Helmut. And so the guy flies, I don't know how many hours, 14, 15 hours, whatever it is. And he lands, and we say, hey, we could take you to your hotel we got for you. We could do business tomorrow. Would you? He's like, nope, nope. He wants to get right to business. He just flew 15 hours. Nope, right to business. I said, would you like to get a bite to eat? We could have, nope. He wants to, okay, we want to go right back to the office and negotiate. I'm like, fine. And this guy spoke very little English. So when I say very little, I'm talking probably less than 10 words.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
That's
And
amazing.
so me and my little brother are sitting in the office, and then you got Helmut and then the translator, and we're trying to negotiate. And man, it is going badly. I could just tell. He was like very abrupt and aggressive, and we're losing the deal for sure. And so the other problem was our translator was weak. So I would have some authority in my voice. I'd say, tell him this. Like I wanted not just what I wanted to be relayed, but the way I wanted it delivered.
The intonation.
And he would be like this, are you sure you want me to say that to him? I'm like, yeah, say that to him exactly the way I said it to you. Okay. His body language was like, sir, he's delivering it like this. And we're just dying here. So finally, I said, after about an hour, they're getting ready to leave. I could tell he wants to fly back to Germany and it's over. We lost the deal. So I thought, we need to go back to basics. I thought, let's take a quick break. We get up. I pull my little brother aside in the restaurant. I said, bro, we're losing this deal. I can read by the guy's body language that he's not happy. We're losing the deal. Let's rely on what we know. You know, body language is universal language, right? And so let's just go with what we see. And so I get back in the room and I tell the translator, I said, listen, you son of a gun, here's exactly what I want you to tell him. Here's the way I want you to tell him. And I want you to do that with your hand on the desk after you say it. Like
Slap your hand on the desk.
On the desk. So I say it right to him, just like that. Do that. He's like, are you sure? I said, yeah, man. And finally, he did what I said, and he just got eye to eye with the guy and just delivered it and did that. And then nobody spoke, and we all just sat there. And the guy goes, good, good. Okay, we do. And my little brother became the president of this German company. Right? But you talk about some pivots, man, and we had to rely. We could not speak each other's language, and the translator was not doing a good job, so we had to rely on what we did know. Fortunately, we had some experience with nonverbal communication because that is the universal language. So even to this day, I try to have a great translator, or I try to have, do business with people that at least speak enough English. But I also try to be as up as I can when it comes to nonverbal communication, because that has gotten me out of many, many pickles and is universal.
Well, what do you think changed it? Because they were so, Helmut was so adamant that it was not going to happen. But what was your body language that changed it, do you think?
Well, I think it was the delivery, the authoritiveness, but also that he doesn't have another choice. We've been so I kind of negative. We went through, look, we've been in the business this long. We've done this high of volume of business. We're young, we're unattached, right? Proximity wise, we're here. And we know everybody else you're considering, and there's no other choice. And I went through the reasons of why there's no other choice. So let's just stop wasting time, basically. Because I kind of thought about his personality. He was that type A kind of aggressor. So with type A aggressors, if you come in giver, they hate it. You have to tone match them. If they're here, you can't come in here and walk your way up. You have to tone match them as aggressive and then walk them down. So that's what I did. And it wound up working in our favor.
It's fascinating. You've talked about body language as being universal, except that in my experience, it isn't. As you probably know from Asia, the Asians are much more reticent. They don't give a lot of facial expressions.
Sure.
And they don't smile, they don't gesture very much. And also, you have to know in Asia that the position in the room where someone is sitting, really who is the CEO or who's got the power, who doesn't. And you may be negotiating with a key middle manager, but ultimately the CEO and senior committee have to approve it. So what do you do there?
Well, and that actually could be intentional on their part, right? So it is trickier in Asia. And what we've seen is we'll generally get on the ground there and we'll set up a baseline. So if we're not in Asia, they're here, whatever, but we'll stage the room. This might sound bad, Philip, but we'll actually stage the room. We'll set up cameras, and then we'll have somebody kind of bring them coffee or tea and some refreshments for 5 minutes, and we'll study a normal baseline behavior of what we can collect within that 5 minutes. So before we go into the room to negotiate, what we've seen in the past is, depending on where a person's sitting, is who's kind of in charge. And we've seen them try to dupe us to where the person that they had sitting in the right seat was actually not the powerful person.
Right.
And they had them sitting in a different seat. So what we would do is actually skirt, like we would tell some joke that is not inappropriate, but a little distasteful. This might sound like a crazy strategy. And then what they'll do is they'll all look at the person to see if he accepted, right?
That's
And then
very
we'll say,
clever.
we're sorry for that joke. We just wanted to see what the dynamics were. And then we'll say, we perceive that you're actually the person we're supposed to talk to. And just by being that transparent with them, they appreciate, like, these are some sharp guys that figured out,
Right.
and that kind of breaks the ice. So we've done that on multiple occasions, but generally, even if you're trying to be aware of body language, we kind of know that if you do this, cross arms, that might be a sign of resistance,
Yes.
or an ankle lock, right? But what we found is it's really three things that make it so. You have to have three different characteristics to the positive or negative to make it so. So you can kind of be aware, like somebody might be talking and then they uncross arms because they remember.
Mhm.
But then a few minutes later, without realizing, as soon as they stop thinking about it, maybe their ankles lock, or they'll show their mouth with no lip, like real thin lips with them, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't have to be three things at the same time, but within 5 minutes or so, if they show three indicators, it's easier to tell that the way that their heart's kind of feeling. And so we'll look at the room for a few minutes before we go in to try to figure out a normal baseline behavior,
Mm.
and certainly figure out who's the person we're supposed to be talking to. But it's definitely trickier.
I think a method that you taught me, you can deliberately say drop a pen or a pencil so that you have to look under the table to see whose ankles are locked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the top psychiatrists, they found that when somebody's ankles are kind of locked like this, they're like, we're not going to have a breakthrough today. They're not going to share. When
Mm.
their feet are flat on the ground, it's like, wow, we might have something today here. So
Mm.
yeah, I do that a lot. I'll drop a pen and I'll look and say, okay, I got this going on, but I want to see if I have any other verifiers. I'll look under the table to see if their ankles are locked or what I can see. Sometimes they'll have their hands folded on their lap, whatever.
Huh. That's fascinating also.
Yeah.
Um, any other cultural faux pas that you've encountered?
Well, I'll tell you one. I don't know how appropriate this is for your show, but I'll tell you the brief close ups of the one that almost got me killed. And this is by all means, it's not a negative to go to this place. I think in any place, you can be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
But back in 2011, I got asked to. So every year, these global entrepreneurs, they'll have a summit. Uh, it's like a financial summit, and they'll rotate that between London, Dubai, and South Africa. And these are like the world leaders with the global entrepreneurs, and they're basically talking about, in one word, I guess we could say, control. And so a lot of the subjects are centered around countries that have hit hyperinflation and then have completely crashed, and then they've adopted a stronger currency, right? And so the country of Zimbabwe had just went through hyperinflation. There's bread lines, the whole nine, and they crashed. And out of all the African countries, they actually adopted the U.S. dollar. So instead
Right.
of using the rand or other forms of currency like South Africa does, they adopted the U.S. dollar. So it did stabilize very quickly. Well, now it's a race of how do you get down on the ground and get cell phone towers up and phones in everybody's hands, and right. And so Richard Branson was down there, and many others, and I got asked because of my mathematical background to go represent the United States for this summit and help restructuring like a mathematical plan that's more sustainable, including what their gross domestic product is and all those things. So I was going to be down there for several weeks, and it was really the trip of a lifetime. So I flew into South Africa, into Johannesburg. I went to, for the first time, this meeting was going to be held in Zimbabwe. So I attended the meeting, and and they have some talk, kind of like Larry King type talk shows. They go out to the whole country. I was on the shows. I met with all the different presidents of different countries and their ministers of finance, and golfed with them all and did the whole deal. Put on several other seminars while I was there. Literally one of the greatest experiences of my life. I was surreal, sitting with these
Yeah.
people conducting, representing the U.S. So I guess because of the way that I conducted myself, and I was very um, prone to doing media, which maybe was my faux pas, but I was doing a lot of media while I was there. Anyway, the last day that I'm there, it's like the greatest trip ever. The last day I'm there, we were assigned this driver the whole time, and he was a very South African proper, very proper guy named Wellington. And I said, "Hey, Wellington," I said, I would like to, we're leaving tomorrow. I'd like to go to a place where we could actually get some souvenirs for the family. I want the real deal African stuff with the women with the baskets and like commerce. I want to get to the real deal stuff and buy some souvenirs for the family. He's like, "Don't worry, brother. I know exactly where to take you." So right before we leave on this trip, the president of the country, he calls me, right? And he said, "Listen, uh, so the rightful at that time, the president that everybody kind of looked to was a guy named Robert Mugabe.
Mugabe.
He's kind of gone down as one of the worst rulers in history. He's a very, very brutal guy. And there was another guy named BT at the time that actually had run for president, and I believe he won actually. And they were like, try to get me out of the White House, or their version of the White House. I'm staying. Robert's like, I don't care what that says. I'm still ruling. So half the country looked at BT as the rightful ruler. The other half looked at sort of Mugabe out as like fear, right? Because he would burn your house down or shut the water. He shut the water off while we were there. We couldn't have access to water. It's crazy. So this guy BT calls me. He's like, "Look, we want to have one more meeting with you. I know you're leaving tomorrow." And he was a great guy. He said, but our most successful entrepreneur of our country, he's in charge of all these banks. He's here and I want him to meet you. He's our Bill Gates, he said. He's our Bill Gates. I said, okay. So out of respect, I threw a suit on, and I was with my driver and my publicist. I said, "Look, before we go shopping, I got to make one more pit stop downtown because they're calling me back, and it's probably only going to take an hour." So we're getting into the car. So it's me and my driver, Wellington, my publicist, Margot, and then some guy that I had no idea who he was, an American young kid, about 24. He's like, "Hey, dude, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, man. Can I get a ride into town with you guys?" I'm like, "Sure, man, no problem. I don't have a clue who this person is." We all go. I go meet with the guy, Beatty. I meet with the Nigel guy. We take photos. All good. Greatest trip of my life. Unbeknownst to us, we get back in the car, and I said, "Now let's go shopping." We drive way out to this place in Zimbabwe that's got like 50,000 people that have been displaced, and they're all living in these fields, and they're just trading. It's like a giant swap meet of anything you can imagine. And we're pretty far out in the rurals by this time. Well, we had no idea that, I guess because I had done so much media and I had done I was meeting with important people, they thought that I was important. So they actually attempted to kidnap me.
Oh
And
no.
so we're driving down this rural road, and there's like these dirt kind of intersections. They're not really roads, but like there's cattle and people crossing. You have to kind of roll to a stop. Well, all of a sudden, this pickup truck blocks us,
Hmm.
and I see guys jump out with automatic weapons and machetes, and they're just bum rushing us. And so I tell the driver, "Back up, back up, back up." Well, they block us with another car in.
Hmm.
And it's like, so the only thing I have time to is I turn to the back seat and I tell my publicist, Margot, I said, "Look, no matter what, don't let them pull us out of the car."
Hmm.
Well, within seconds, bam, they're in the car. They are grabbing us. We're getting beat on.
Hmm.
They have my whole body out of the car. I'm just hanging onto the steering wheel, right?
Wow.
And my whole body's out of the car, and they're trying to get us out. And it's brutal, man. It is really brutal. And it's interesting because for a second, I thought, my son was 3 at the time. I said, "Okay, I don't know if my son will remember me. What video do I have? Like, I thought this is it, man. Well, eventually, it took so long. We fought them off long enough to where people started, they had like the first version of flip phones with cameras and they were filming. So these bandits, they noticed this and they changed their story and they speak a language there called Shawnee. And they're telling our driver in Shawnee, and where he's beaten up, and they're telling the driver and like yelling at him to tell me something. So he's like, Dan, they are now impersonating that they're with the police division and they want you to get in their car quietly and they are going to drive you back there to take you to sort this all out to the jail. And then he goes, but I grew up in Sim and that is not where the jail is, and they wish to hold you captive and rob you and to do bad things to you for money. That's what he told me, like how he told me. He's like, what do you want me to tell him? I'm like, I don't know, man. I was like, look, there's no way I'm getting in their car. Like, that's not. So if they're gonna kill us, they have to kill us in the street. Well, make a long story short, the truck behind us moved, and we had to try to make a getaway. And I had this guy. I was kind of wrestling with this guy halfway in, halfway out of the car. I pinned him down. We actually made it to the jail, and almost had to do a month in a Zimbabwe jail. But we wound up kind of escaping with our lives, narrowly beaten up, but escaping with our lives. It was a really wild thing. And I'll tell you a funny story, and whether you're a fan or not, I will always owe this to Donald Trump because he got me out of it. They're going through my phone. They confiscated my phone and they put us in a jail. They said, we don't know what's happening, but we'll sort this all out when the judge is back. I said, when's the judge going to come back? They said, in a month. So I said, well, maybe I'll live, but I'm going to be in a Zimbabwe jail for a month. Well, within about an hour, they came back and they had my phone and they were going through it. And they said, I had pictures of the guy BT that I had just been with, who's the rifle. So they're asking me how I knew him. And I thought, man, I don't know what to say. Because if they're on his side, I could get
Right.
sprung. If they're against him, I could get worse.
Right.
So I told our driver, ask the question again. And I was trying to read body language. And then I just took a guess and I said, look, BT I don't know the man, but I perceive him to be a good man. And, here's why I'm here, blah, blah, blah. I told him the story. And he said, BT, good man. We got spraying out of jail. Then they go through and they saw pictures of me and Donald Trump. We worked together for a few years. And they said, and so that was the whole thing. So now we're like all beaten up. Our clothes are all ragged. We're all messed up. And then they're like the same people. They're now waiting to take pictures with us. And like, we're trying to clean up and do this bit for the photos. But again, I love Zimbabwe. I love the people there. I think it was like wrong place, wrong time. But sometimes if you're, a little too popular in those certain areas, it can
Yes.
work against you for sure.
Wow, what a great story.
Uh,
That's marvelous. One of our other guests, actually, on a podcast, told about how she almost got kidnapped. Actually, she did get kidnapped. And so you've told the story of how you almost got killed. So
oh,
I don't know
yeah.
if it's progress or not, but it's certainly fascinating.
And that was 2011. I think that it's better. You have to have some precautions for sure.
Right.
Um, I was in Bangkok, Thailand recently, and despite popular belief in movies, I had many friends down there. They're like, "This is a safe city. You could walk around at night. It's a great city." And they said one of the reasons that crime is so low is three things. Number one is they're very harsh on crime, so nobody wants to commit a crime. Number two is the culture there. They teach their children. A large part of the culture is about honor.
Right.
And so they teach their children and train their kids. And one of the biggest things is they've eradicated hunger. So they said, look, we haven't eradicated poverty, but here when restaurants have food and they make it, they don't. In America at 10:30, man, they throw it all out. Breakfast is over, throw everything out because we don't want to get sued, right?
Right.
We're afraid of being sued in compliance. But over there, it's like, look, there's food here that's good, and there's people that have, so they'll have these drop-off stations. He's like, it's okay to have low-income areas, but when you don't have the hunger element, there's a lot less serious crime. And so I think that's the big thing of these countries. Most people are amazing; they're good people, but when there's hunger, in some of these third world countries, there's going to be a few that are looking to take advantage of the situation.
Yeah, well, that's very true and very fascinating. And, some great lessons for this country and other parts of the world as well. Um, what else would you like to share with us? Your stories have been amazing. Any final lessons or anything you'd like to share?
The one thing I'll share, I thought a little bit about this, and I get asked quite a bit, hey, there's a lot of keys to success, so there's a lot of things you can share with an audience. What would be the one thing? And if I have to pick something, I'll say the importance, and we've talked about this, I think, Philip, is the importance of separating our vision from our strategy, right?
Mhm.
So if
Right.
somebody's watching or listening to this podcast and they're saying, man, part of my personally, I don't have an objective anymore. I've been very blessed and fortunate. So I don't have a personal objective to try to make any more money. I'm not trying to have more personal influence. I really am working now, and what gets me out of bed every morning is kind of paying it back. I was this snotty-nosed young guy with an attitude that, fortunately for me, these very great people, much greater than I'll ever be, I'm sure, took an interest in me and helped me along and helped me learn some things and put me in the right circles. And so I always remember that, everybody deserves a chance. Everybody should have a chance to make it successfully. However, we don't want to go into things with rose-colored glasses, and I think it's imperative for us to separate our vision from our strategy. And I'll tell you what I mean by that is most people at one time or another in their life will have this great vision of an idea or a vision of something they want to happen. And they get really clear on what it is. They might not have all the how. And frankly, if you wait for all the how you're going to do it, by the time you collect all the how, the world changed so much, you need a new how. So we just need to get started. We have 5% of the how, jump in. But you'll have this great vision of what you want to accomplish, let's say nationally or internationally, globally, whatever, based around your business. And then you have your strategy. And your strategy is something that you'll come up with kind of in a classroom, so to speak, with some other people. Guys, how are we going to do this? How are we going to accomplish this vision? And you'll come up with a strategy. Now, it's naive to think that strategy right out of the gate is going to be able to facilitate the vision. It just won't. So from my experience, and I think this applies to most people, is that you have your vision. And when you have great vision, we need to lock it down and make it fixed, where we don't move it, we don't scale it, we don't mess with the vision. It's fixed metrics and it's locked. Then we have our strategy, and that when we launch that strategy, it's going to roll 5-6 feet and then fall over, and the wheels are going to come off. And people get discouraged and they're like, oh man, I thought I was finally onto something. I thought this one was the one that was going to work. And I'm like, yeah, it still is. You have to refine the strategy. You have to not mess with the vision, but constantly refine, tweak, and move. Refine, tweak, and move the strategy, not the vision. So they might put the little car back together again and launch a variation of the same strategy, and they roll it. Now it rolls 8 feet and falls over to the right, and the wheels come off. And by that second time, they're like, oh man, what do? They're second guessing the vision, if the vision's still going to work, instead of just second guessing the strategy and manipulating and kind of, tweaking and refining the strategy. They're thinking, should I still do this? And what they'll do is they'll either lose belief in the vision or they'll scale back the vision. And they'll say, okay, even if we could only hit 50% of this goal, it's still great. Like they'll scale the vision. And that's not what we have to do. We have to, once we have great vision, we have to leave it fixed. Those fixed parameters, we don't move. And what you have to do is just keep launching the strategy. And from my experience, and I think most successful people will tell you, on the 6th or 7th refinement, on the 6th or 7th tweak, that's when the strategy will now fully accomplish the vision. It pops and it'll actually accomplish what you want it to accomplish. But we have to keep those things separate. So in my own organizations, I've had a really clear vision of what I want to happen, and then I'll launch a new strategy set on Monday. And I'll actually have my people go like this, Dan, this isn't going to work, right? Like we're going to roll it out. They say, it's not going to work, right? I go, I know. I'm so excited about it. Because I know going in it's not going to work, but I need data collection. I need to know where it doesn't work and what does work, what elements succeed, So I'm going to roll that car. It's going to fall 5 feet over on the right and the wheels come off. I'm going to study like, okay, that's interesting. And it's on the 6th or 7th refinement. It works. And I need them to continue to launch that car or marketing or whatever program to give me the data. So finally my vision will, or my strategy will accomplish the vision. And I don't know if you've ever listened to the story of 7-Up, but in line with what we're saying, they started as 1-Up soda. They were going to 1-up everybody else, and it was called 1-Up soda. But they didn't quite have the recipe right. And the guy went to 2-Up soda, and it was worse. And he went to 3-Up soda, and it was a little better, and 4-Up soda. He went all the way to 6-Up soda and says, I'm out. I can't do this anymore. And he got discouraged. And that's the problem. Most people give up 5 minutes before the miracle happens. Right. But he got discouraged and he sold it to another guy, and the other guy just tweaked what the guy already had. He said, let's create a little lemon lime and let's do a little bit different marketing campaign. And I think it was, what is it, Coke, I think, owns some. They come in and said, hey, we want it. Things to the moon now, 7-Up. It was the last tweak. Wow. But we got to stay in for it. So I think a big thing is, again, when we have vision, leave it firm and locked and fixed metrics. But don't expect our strategy on the first go-around to accomplish and facilitate the vision. It's on the 6th or 7th refinement of the strategy that houses the success. And that goes for our in business, but also our personal lives as well. So something to keep in mind.
Whoa, well, that's amazing advice. Thank you so much. I had never heard that story before. That wonderful strategy. Well, today's guest, again, has been Dan Vega, a visionary, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a coach, a talk show host, an investor, a speaker. And this has been Philip Auerbach with Auerbach International, AUERBACHINT-INTL.com. And in the beginning of the show, Dan mentioned our nonprofit, and that is called the Auerbach Global Impact Foundation. And that is the website, theagif.org. So I hope all of you will join us next week for another edition of Global Gurus and their wonderful stories of international business. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip.